what I'm going to do is one of the other recovery coaches is my meditation teacher, and he also runs he's the most often called Recovery 2.0 sub coach. I'm going to ring this gong, and we'll try and do what I've come to call intentional breathing meditation. What my coach and I have talked about is how to get into a state of samadhi, really blissful awareness of just the breath and cooling out the monkey mind. When one observes the breath of someone in deep meditation, it's usually about 4 breaths per minute. It's a big number to think about, but if you think about it, taking a 7-second inhale and a 7-second exhale, then that puts you at 1 breath per 15 seconds. Hence, you don't have to be a math major. That's 4 breaths a minute. If that causes you any kind of angst, anxiety, abandon it and just pay attention to the inhale and the exhale being smooth and steady. So we'll do this for 2 minutes. And I'll ring this bell when the 2 minutes are up, or you might hear my phone. All right. Slowly come on back into the room. If you want, just take a deep inhale. Hold your breath for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bring your chin towards your chest, wiggle your fingers, and blink your eyes. Well, welcome. Thank you for being with me, sharing your recovery as I share my recovery in this. It's Sunday, most of parts of the world, and it's an afternoon, and it's a beautiful afternoon here in Kansas City, Missouri. My webinar speech, what have you, my share is going to be sober before 30. And I like to kind of keep it green, as I found early on, because linear time is linear time, but in the recovery world, I'm this far away from my next drink or drug. I am a child of the 60s. There is 20 years difference between my mother and I. I'll actually be 60 years old on the 30th of September. Funny thing about being in Joshua Tree with 30-some other people in September 2019, 2 other coaches and myself all have birthdays within the same day of each other. And it was just a wonderful connection. So my mom just turned 80. She lives in New York. So I think about what it would have been like to be a parent, let alone a single parent at 20 in New York City in those days. And I just can't imagine. I didn't possess the tools. I didn't know shit from Shinola or my ass from a hole in the ground at 20. But my mother and my birth father were both of the same age. He was a German Jew from France that had moved to New York to study photography, and a Holocaust survivor. So I have that going for me. I also am a first-generation New Yorker. Great time to be from New York, as I've learned now to say New York is a great place to be from and to visit. And my mom still lives in the apartment that I grew up with my brother. My birth father also has experienced, he's passed now, and he was a photographer, and he had a brother, my uncle, who passed away mysteriously in a fire. I come to find out as an adult that probably drugs and alcohol were involved. So maybe that's where a little bit of the addictive gene comes from. The other thing that I realized about my upbringing and my childhood trauma is that I am a survivor of child molestation. My parents left my brother and I to the care of a young male neighbor, and he proceeded to molest me. And when I was about 10 years old, this was something that was like really eating at me, keeping me up at night. I mean, it finally came to an end when, I admitted over the kitchen table that something was going on. And he never was asked to babysit. Now, there's a whole other story to that, again, that I might get into, I might not. We'll see how time goes. I was also a very sick kid with a kidney infection. So I spent a lot of time in and out of the renal pediatric unit in New York City Hospital. I was given steroids. They gave me terrible nightmares, as I now recall, how I had a very poor sleep disorder going on. But I was given a trial drug. It knocked it out when I was reaching puberty or so. But I continued to have some of these things that haunted me. We were what we call latchkey kids in New York. Latchkey means you had your key to your apartment door around your neck. And, our parents were artists or educators, or most of us came from 2-income homes. So there wasn't a lot of real good discipline going on. We all had our own thing going on, and we raised it ourselves. If I had a friend who was a younger sibling, then whatever his older siblings turned him on to, we got turned on to. So right around the magic age of 13, in the Jewish tradition, your bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, I actually wasn't, but that's when we have our first drink or drug. I think that if we compared notes, we'd all say that, yeah, just like Tommy says, I mean, shitty diets, overstimulation from TV. I was actually in love with the radio. That was my thing. Wolfman Jack. There were New York radio stations that were really, really great. Don Kirshner's rock concert, concerts in Central Park, things like that. Music plays a big part of my addiction and my recovery, actually. I'm not going to try and tell my entire story, but getting back to coming to terms with that molestation as being something that I needed to douse that fire with, with drugs and alcohol. I remember one time not being able to sleep and taking a piece of paper and writing down, "I will get," and I named him for what he did to me. And I took this piece of paper. I mean, this is really some therapists will take this apart. And I've covered this with therapists, but not this actual act. I took this piece of paper, I folded it up real small, like a spy note, and I taped it to the underside of a desk drawer. Whatever happened to that desk, I have no idea, but that was my ceremonial purging. I had the opportunity to go to college, and I turned 18 at college in Brockport, New York. Second coldest place I've ever been. First coldest place is definitely Wisconsin, Minnesota area. Actually, Des Moines, Iowa, where my family is from, is pretty cold too. But I just remember, being at a place where I needed to purge this stuff. So fast forward, I really felt out of place at college because I had already gone through my various narcotic stages, and people in college were learning how to tap a keg for the first time. And that was, not something I was into. But it definitely, cheap beer at college helped. I ended up going back to New York City and living with my parents for a while, and then going to night school at New York Institute of Technology, where at the tender age of 19, 20, I fell in love. And something inside of us said, let's get married. And we got married, and we went on a sailing honeymoon to the US Virgin Islands. And when we got to St. Croix, we really kind of took a look at what our young married life back in New York and in Woodside, Queens was like. And we said, should we try and stay here? We can get a hotel for a month for like what we have in our pocket. And we did. And we stayed in St. Croix for a month. We kind of investigated jobs. We both got jobs in the service industry. I, in turn, got a job in a gated resort hotel as a bartender and then a sous chef. and then like a concierge running these honeymoon packages for the travel agents that sent their clients there. That was the first time the seed of AA and recovery was planted in me. I was at the time now 21, divorced, single, and living in a resort area and trying to get over a broken heart. And there were a few people that I realized, were coming into later a Mexican restaurant that I worked in and helped build, that were taking up a table in the back on a particular night and draining the iced tea and asking for free refills. And they were like Peanuts, the Peanuts characters. They all, they didn't look like they belonged together, but when they were together, they were together. And I ended up friending quite a few of them. And one time I was dancing in a club in the Virgin Islands with one of those sober folks. And I said, "What are you on?" And he said, "Nothing." And I said, "I can't believe it. I can't believe it." And who knows what I wasn't on, to tell you the truth. I had a roommate in the Virgin Islands also, who invited her mother and her companion to stay with us. Well, they stayed in a hotel. It turns out Elaine and this African-American fellow, William, had been friends at Hazleton, and they were both in recovery. So this is getting into probably 1986 or 87. And they were doing all the things that tourists do without drinking and drugging. I managed to look at my drinking while in St. Croix and looking at the people around me and the fact that I was in the service industry, and I wasn't really feeling comfortable in my skin. And I ended up leaving St. Croix a month to the day before Hurricane Hugo. And I got a job in a luxury hotel in New York called the Grand Bay. And, I haven't even mentioned that my mother got remarried when I was 2 to someone from Des Moines, Iowa, that she had grown up with, that was a graduate of the Juilliard School of Music in 1959. And he raised me, and I took his last name when I was 2. But just to kind of dovetail and I don't call him my stepfather, I took his last name, into this story, and I really got to get into the recovery part. The hotel that I was working at was also a hotel where he worked playing in the big band in that hotel. The head of security of this hotel saw something in me and knew that the third seed of recovery needed to be planted in me, and he was the one to do it. And I was getting ready to move after being in New York for a couple of years to Washington, D.C. I had worked for a group that had an art gallery and an import business. We were importing Indonesian wood carvings and jewelry. And they had the opportunity to open up a store in Union Station in Washington, D.C. And I took that opportunity. And Richie gave me the name for AA in Washington, D.C. before I left. He said, "You may want to make this phone call when you get to D.C." Well, this is 1989 and September, and I wasn't in DC but a few months when I had a small fender bender with the company van. In DC, it's easy to do. They're in these roundabouts that you think end on the other side, but it turns into a one-way street, right? So driving impaired in DC is a trick unto itself. Well, it didn't take me long to call Alcoholics Anonymous in Washington, DC. And I realized today that I am one of those miracles that we talk about in the foundation of AA, people that don't necessarily go to a rehab, but they walk in cold to an AA meeting. And I did in 1989, April of 1989. I understand that in Texas, they say often in AA, declare yourself. And that's when you say your sobriety date. So my sobriety date is April 24th, 1989. I had gone to a group called the Room with a View on Capitol Hill. And I went to that group for 1 week straight. And I had a problem with insomnia, and I still had some marijuana, and I smoked and went to the meeting probably the next day. And the woman that gave me my first 24-hour coin was in the elevator, and she said, "Eric, you don't seem like yourself." And I said, "Well, I smoked pot last night." And she said, "Well, you got to start over." So without even thinking about it, when she said, "Is anyone back from a relapse?" I didn't even know what to say. She said, "Well, Eric, here, take another 24-hour coin." So I have two 24-hour coins in my container. That's quite full these days, thankfully. So relapse is a part of my story. I met my sponsor, Mike, right after, probably within 6 months of going to that meeting. Mike was my sponsor up until my 30th anniversary. He passed away 2 days before my 30th anniversary. Did a lot of stuff with him. Bought a house in Lewes, Delaware as a result of knowing him and people in the fellowship. That first year of recovery was amazing because I was my own boss at this art gallery. I was in a place where they had meetings just about 24/7. Mike said, "We're going to go to a different meeting every month or so." We went to a lot of great meetings, went to a lot of meetings in the hood. I found that I had to seek out where I was comfortable because the environment that I used in was so diverse that going to a meeting with, let's say, all white people or all older white people didn't represent my upbringing or my background or my using. So I needed to kind of be as diverse as my upbringing. But also I needed to go to different formatted meetings. I went to big book meetings. I went to 12 and 12 meetings. We went to a speaker meeting in Georgetown that we called the Rah-Rah meeting. They had probably about five-gallon coffee pots going at all times, and about 300 people would gather, and they'd do this countdown to hand out coins, and they'd start at 50 years on down to literally 24 hours. And when they get to that 24 hour, does anyone have one day? They start banging on the chairs and tables, keep coming back. And people were literally lining up for a desire coin. I mean, it was awesome. Went to meetings in Delaware, got married again in DC, had a child. And actually my son's mom, we met because as I said, that first year was awesome. I revolved my work week around meetings, my work day around the gym, And, all I was just trying to do was stay sober. I had no intention in working the steps. In fact, I looked at the steps and I said, well, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that one. And, lo and behold, I said to Mike, I found a way I can stay sober for an entire year. And he said, oh yeah, what's that? And I said, I'm going to work a step a year. And he said, or a step a month. I'm going to do a step a month for a year. And actually, that's a pretty good plan. If you can start in January and concentrate on step one, go to February, do 2, March, do 3, April, do 4. And now, I come into contact with Tommy Rosen, and he points out so many people do 1, 2, 3, and they're out. It's the pick and shovel work that sends a lot of people back out. But Mike said to me, well, I've made a reservation at a monastery in Berryville, Vermont for myself and a few of the guys that I sponsor, and we're all going to do our 4th and 5th step then. And, I didn't even have a higher power at that time. So this is, 1989, 1990, maybe. And this is pre-cell phones, actually. So we're getting ready, and I think, oh, I'm going to eat great, like with these monks at this monastery. It's going to be like Friar Tuck and Robin Hood, and they're going to be doing their chanting, and I'll be able to meditate. And very far from the truth. I had intention to run a hot bath and listen to Miles Davis and write out my 4th step. Well, the bath wouldn't even get halfway filled when it ran cold, and the food was all number 10 tin cans and whatnot. But I was able to get in touch with my higher power. I found that whatever gave Miles Davis the ability to turn prana, breath, into music through his horn, that was good enough explanation for me. So for years, I used Miles Davis as my higher power, and probably kind of blew. Listened to a lot of John Coltrane. If you listen to John Coltrane, Love Supreme, he says that he's chanting in that. I'd love to meet Alice Coltrane. Apparently, she's a great meditator. My sobriety continued to grow. There were times when I could have relapsed, but I didn't. I think I was really prideful, and I was grounded, and I wanted to prove to myself. A lot of my parent-teacher conferences, when I was a kid, my mom would come back and say, they say you have so much potential, but this doesn't happen or that doesn't happen. So I took that into consideration, and I thought, I can do this. There's a lot of things in my life that have not occurred, and drugs and alcohol have gotten in the way. Let me see what I can do here. And in fact, in my 1st anniversary, one of the guys showed up and he said, I came just to see you get your 1st anniversary coin because I wouldn't have bet on you. And that kept me sober for a while, just that one story. We ended up moving to Kansas City when I had about 6 years of recovery or so. Maybe it was more. And I remember something that someone in a meeting in DC had said. DC, very transient place. People were hired by the federal government on contracts. And this guy walked into a meeting and he said, I'm here for X amount of weeks and I want to leave with at least 8 phone numbers. So that's what I did. It took me a while to go to some meetings here. I think I became a little bit of a dry drunk, but I looked at it. You had to look at a map in those days. If I'm here in 95, I moved to Kansas City, Missouri. And mustard seed, if you look in AA directories, that's always the name of a group. It's the name of a group that I visited in New York City when I was there. Turns out it was right around the corner from my birth father's home in Manhattan. So, I mean, a lot of coincidences, a lot of, you can't make this shit up, happens to me in recovery. My meeting Tommy Rosen is a great one, and I won't use this to tell that story because I'm going to open it up for some questions pretty soon. But I looked at a map, I saw where mustard seed was, and I went to the mustard seed group a couple of times, and I said, I don't know if I can stay sober here. You don't do the same format as in New York, and I'm not digging it. And they said, you need to go to this meeting called at Country Club Christian Church. It's run by a guy named Joe Bader. He's from New Jersey and he worked for AT&T. So, I sought out this guy, and he eventually told his story when I started going to this group. I mean, the group was really small. It was only meeting a few days a week. But I said to Joe, I said, I need to find a sponsor here in Kansas City. And he said, oh, I sponsor this guy named Dale Irwin. He's an attorney. You'll get along with him. And I grabbed Dale as my Kansas City sponsor, but I always kept in touch with Mike. Mike and I went to the International Convention in Austin, Texas. I can't tell you the year, but it was great to be with him for a few days. I met the delegation from Kansas City up in the rafters, but I sat with the folks from DC. Mike came out of the closet about 4 years into my recovery. That opened up a whole other group of people in recovery, since I was straight, but my mom was a dancer. My dad, the musician, was on Broadway, and my brother was a musician. I was around all these artsy fartsy people. Being gay was, like anything else. It was really normal. My mom had male friends that were couples that we would always refer to, so-and-so and so-and-so, George and T, Bob and Ray, So I was comfortable going to gay meetings. No one ever said, why are you wearing a wedding ring? Get out of here. So, it became all inclusive. I really did rely on the 1.0 of recovery for a long time. And then I met Tommy Rosen through someone that came to that group at the Country Club Christian Church. And I came home from meeting with this person over coffee, and he said, you sound like my sponsor from LA, Tommy Rosen. And I said, oh, you need to introduce me to him, because I was just trying to get people to come to my yoga class, right? I wasn't trying to do anything other than share the spirituality that I received from unrolling a yoga mat. In fact, I remember a pastor at this church that I was going to AA. They invited him up to the AA room one time, and he said, I think more spirituality occurs in this room upstairs on the 3rd floor than does downstairs in the pulpit on Sunday. And we know from the South and New York, what's the most segregated day of the week? Sunday. What's the most inclusive place? Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, SA, ACOA, you name them. When the hand of recovery reaches out, we all know, practice the 12th effort or the 12th step. Just to touch and wrap it up on the Tommy Rosen introduction, I came home to my partner, Amy, and I said, how come I know this name, Tommy Rosen? And she said, I've been trying to get you to read this book here for about a year. So I read it in about a weekend, and I called my friend and I said, you got to introduce me to this guy, Tommy Rosen. I mean, I knew guys that went to Horace Mann High School. I delivered drugs I was working in a pharmacy, for a pharmacy that was in Tommy's neighborhood. I mean, I probably, and I went to Dead shows. I probably know this guy. So he introduces Tommy and I on the phone. And this was like early Facebook FaceTime. So David, myself, and Tommy are doing three-way FaceTime calls. And Tommy's driving in a couple of these. I said, wait a minute, this doesn't seem too safe. And he said, no, I pulled over to the side of the road. So Tommy and I became closer. David and I drifted apart. Tommy introduced me to Elizabeth Kipp, who lives very close to me. And, you know, the rest is kind of history. I finally met Tommy, and, you know, he said, hey, I got this, this Zoom account, this lonely Zoom account in September, October of 2019. Who wants to run a meeting? And I said, oh, I'll run a meeting. And I said, you know, men's meetings were really important to me. And then, you know, Iris wanted to come up with a format, and I said, oh, let's do a beginner's meeting. So I do the Recovery 2.0 Zoom meetings with Iris on Wednesday. I do a men's meeting on Monday. And, you know, it's my dharma maybe to start a in-person R2O meeting here in Kansas City, Missouri. I work in the field. I facilitate a group on Wednesday and Thursday at a residential treatment center that I was a first house manager for. I've gotten to know people from the Phoenix, from Archway. You know, it continues to grow, and so does my recovery grow. Let's bring the hands to heart center. Rub them back and forth. You can close your eyes. I'll say the we version as I always do. Bring your hands to your thumbs to your sternum. Take a deep breath. You stay with your breath as you inhale and exhale. Universe, put us in the places you want us to be in, with the people you want us to be with, doing the things you want us to do. Thank you for the joys and the challenges of our lives. We say Amen, Sat Nam, Namaste, in tribute to Charlie Watts and the Rolling Stones. Woot, woot. Or you can just say woot, woot. Peace, blessings. Thank you all for being here.